الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه العبد المؤيد والرسول المسدد حبيب الله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وصحابته المنتجبين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم: والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Throughout Islamic history, from the time of the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam up to our time, Islamic history has witnessed the rise of tens of Islamic theological schools of thought. This is in addition to the tens of jurisprudential schools of thought in Islam. Many books have been written about these various Islamic theological schools of thought, namely in Arabic, a book called Al-Milal wal-Nihal by Abu al-Fath al-Shahristani. This book is the most well-known book in the science of schools of thought in Islam, the various theological schools of thought. We have theological schools of thought and we have jurisprudential schools of thought. What is the difference? The theological schools of thought, their main of difference is regarding theology. Theology is usul ad-din, matters of belief. Usul ad-din, matters regarding Allah, the Prophet, Imamah, things like this. This is called theology. Jurisprudential schools of thought vary regarding issues of fiqh. Their usul ad-din is one and the same. On the issue of theology, they might not have a difference. They might not disagree when it comes to theology. But when it comes to fiqh, they disagree. Islamic laws. Tonight, I'd like to talk about the various Islamic theological schools of thought, because we rarely discuss this topic, and we usually tend to know that in Islam there's two schools of thought: the Sunni school of thought and the Shi'i school of thought, and this is it. No, my dear friends, this is a very basic understanding of Islam. That in Islam we only have the Shi'i school of thought and the Sunni school of thought. We have tens of schools of thought in theology when it comes to Islam. Now, some might ask that why are there so many schools of thought? Why are there so many opinions? We have one book, and that's the Quran. We have one prophet, and that is Rasulullah. And we have one God, and that is Allah. So why is it that we disagree so much? And that we have developed so many schools of thought? If we believe in one religion, one book, one prophet, and one God, and one qibla, what is it that we disagree upon? Why is it that these schools of thought developed? Well, there are several reasons and there are several factors that led to the development of these theological schools of thought. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The first of these factors that led to the development of Islamic theological schools of thought is the event of Saqifa. The event that took place right at the day that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam died in, the day of Saqifa, in which a group of companions gathered at a tent belonging to Bani Sa'ada, and it was later called Saqifat Bani Sa'ada. They gathered to appoint a Khalifa and a leader. And it's as if for the past 24 years that Rasulullah was a prophet and a messenger. It's as if that not a single day passed that he had appointed a successor and a Khalifa. And it's as if just a couple of months ago, Rasulullah had not stopped 100,000 of his companions in the middle of the desert in between Mecca and Medina in an area known as Ghadir Khum to appoint his successor Ali ibn Abi Talib. All of this was neglected. All of this was ignored. The Sahaba, they gathered at Saqifat Bani Sa'ada to appoint a Khalifa from their own. Of course, the event of Saqifah is very interesting. What happened? Who are the people behind Saqifah? Who are the ones that were actually conspiring at the Saqifah? Who were the key players? I have a lecture that I delivered this year in April during Fatimiyya in London, United Kingdom. And this lecture is on YouTube, and it's under the title of An Analysis of the Saqifah. It's a whole lecture on an analysis of the Saqifah. What exactly took place on that day? And who were the key players? And how is it that within a couple of hours, these top Sahaba turned their back to Rasulullah, turned their back to Imam Ali, and they appointed a Khalifa of their own. For those of you that are interested, you can listen to that lecture online. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Saqifah was the first factor for division. It was the first event that allowed division to occur in Islam and amongst Muslims. And hence, it allowed for various schools of thought to develop. This was one factor. Another factor was pure ignorance of Islam. Ignorance of the Quran. Ignorance of the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. And of course, this is bound to happen. When Rasulullah had asked for his companions, for his nation, to follow whom after his death? To follow his family. إِنِّي تَارِكٌ فِيكُمُ الثِّقْلَيْنِ كِتَابَ اللَّهِ وَعِتْرَتِي أَهْلَ بَيْتِي. I leave behind me two things, my book, the book of Allah, and my family. Yet, some people chose to ignore this advice. They chose not to listen to the family of Rasulullah. Obviously, they're going to be ignorant of Islam. They're going to be ignorant of the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah. If you don't have the proper teacher, if you don't have the proper instructor, obviously you're going to seek a deviated path. This is a second factor. A third factor, and this is very key, this third factor, that led to the rise of various schools of thought in Islam. This is an analysis. This factor was that after the death of Rasulullah, right after the death of Rasulullah, when some of the Sahaba came to power, namely Abu Bakr and Umar, they thought of a plan. That plan was that they asked all of the companions who had recorded the ahadith of Rasulullah to come and show their books, show their ahadith. So all of the Sahaba who had written the ahadith of Rasulullah, they thought that these two Sahaba, they had the intention of, for example, publishing these ahadith, teaching these ahadith, spreading these ahadith. They all brought their books that they had recorded the hadith of Rasulullah in, and they were shocked to see that Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Khalifa, he took those books and he burned every single one of them. Every single one of those books that had the compromise of the hadith of Rasulullah were burnt, and they were destroyed by Umar ibn al-Khattab. Not only that, but there was a public ban by these Sahaba that anyone who were to record the ahadith of Rasulullah would be punished and would be jailed. The ahadith of Rasulullah? Did the ahadith of Rasulullah contain blasphemy or heresy? Why would a person who would collect the ahadith of Rasulullah be punished? What was their excuse? Their excuse that Muslims might not distinguish between the Quran and the ahadith of Rasulullah. They might not distinguish between them, and the book of Allah will be lost. People might not be able to distinguish. They don't know, is this a verse from the Quran or is this a hadith from Rasulullah? So they said, let's destroy all the ahadith so that no one will be confused. Well, this was the excuse given. This was the stated excuse. This was the public excuse. But there was another reason why they burnt these ahadith. They wanted to make sure that not a single hadith regarding Imam Ali and the Ahlul Bayt remains for future generations. This was the real excuse. They wanted to make sure that no one narrates that Rasulullah on the day of Ghadir stated, "Man kuntu mawlah fahadha aliyun mawlah." They wanted to make sure that no one hears about "Ana madinatul ilm wa aliyun babuha." They wanted to make sure that no one hears about "Aliyun aqdakum Ali, a'lamukum Ali." Or when he told Imam Ali, "Innaka minni bimanzilati Haruna min Musa illa annahu la nabiyya ba'di." That you are to me like Aaron was to Moses. And Aaron was what to Moses? He was a successor. Thus, this was the real justification. That they didn't want the hadith of regarding Ahlul Bayt and Imam Ali to spread, the virtues of Ahlul Bayt to spread. And what happened was that when the true teachings of Rasulullah were eradicated, this gave room for others to come and lie and fabricate and say that Rasulullah said this and this. These are the hadith of Rasulullah. One of such people was Abu Huraira. Abu Huraira, who lived with Rasulullah for less than 2 years, he narrated a hadith from Rasulullah more than any other Sahabi. He narrates from Rasulullah within these 2 years more ahadith than Imam Ali who lived with Rasulullah for over 30 years. Does this make sense? To the point that Umar ibn al-Khattab had a cane called a durra. Now, I don't know if they show this on the TV series, but these are some facts that needs to be mentioned. Umar ibn al-Khattab had a cane called a durra. This cane wasn't just a typical cane. It had a very heavy end. He would beat some people with it. And one of the people that were abused by Umar ibn al-Khattab was Abu Huraira. He beat him. He told him that I hear you keep on mentioning a hadith of Rasulullah. If I hear you giving more mentioning a hadith of Rasulullah, I'll beat you some more. And among the people that were abused by Umar ibn al-Khattab and his cane was the sister of Abu Bakr. After the death of Abu Bakr. This is mentioned by Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili in his explanation on Sharh Nahj al-Balagha. Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili is a Sunni scholar, he's not a Shi'i scholar. He says that when Abu Bakr passed away, his sister Farwa, she would sit and mourn and cry. Umar would come to her and he would beat her. And he would say it is not allowed in Islam for people to mourn their dead. And when the living, they mourn their dead, the dead will be tortured in their graves. Who does this remind you of? Which modern day school of thought? The Wahhabi school of thought. Anyhow, ahadith were banned. The genuine, authentic, credible ahadith of Rasulullah were banned. And this gave room for others. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. A fourth factor that led to the development of Islamic theological schools of thought is that there were certain converts to Islam from Judaism and Christianity. These were priests, rabbis, even archbishops. They converted into Islam, and some Sahaba, they gave them room to come and lecture, to come and teach. Among these converts were Ka'b al-Ahbar. Ka'b al-Ahbar was a Jewish monk, a Jewish rabbi converted to Islam. Among them was Wahab al-Yamani. Among them was Tamim al-Dari. Tamim al-Dari was an archbishop that converted to Islam. No, there's nothing wrong with converting into Islam. We welcome anyone who wants to become Muslim. But what happened was, these rabbis and priests were given podiums. They were given a platform. They were given a microphone for them to come and give lectures. What's ironic is that Imam Ali alayhi salam was suppressed after the death of Rasulullah. When the Sahaba came to power, Imam Ali had to sit at home for 6 months. The first and most genuine student of Rasulullah had to sit at home while these rabbis and priests who converted into Islam were allowed to come and lecture and speak. And where did they get their knowledge from? From the Old Testament and the New Testament. These scholars were allowed to mention biblical stories. Stories from the Torah. Stories from the Injil. And what's funny is that there were Muslims that sat there and they started recording. They started taking notes. And they ascribed some of these stories to Rasulullah directly. Stories from the Bible. Stories from the Torah, from the Injil. And they were taken as facts. What's ironic is that the ahadith of Rasulullah were burnt. No one was allowed to spread the ahadith of Rasulullah. Yet these archbishops, priests, monks, and rabbis, they were given the freedom to speak as much as they want. In fact, Umar ibn al-Khattab would sit there with his buddy, Ka'b al-Ahbar, and he would tell him, lecture us, give us from your knowledge. And Ka'b al-Ahbar would sit there with self-confidence, and he would give lectures, and people would listen, and they would record, and they would ascribe it to Islam. That's why we have a whole section. We have a bunch of ahadith that we call Isra'iliyat. These are Israelite ahadith. We don't accept them. We don't accept such ahadith. Because you can tell they have been affected by certain Jews and Christians. We don't accept many of these ahadith. Many of these ahadith we don't accept. And what's sad is that Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim are full of these ahadith. They're full of such ahadith, Isra'iliyat. For example, I'll tell you one of these ahadith. And this has been mentioned in Sahih Bukhari regarding Prophet Ibrahim. Prophet Ibrahim and his wife Sarah, they went to Egypt. From Palestine all the way to Egypt. When they went to Egypt, the Pharaoh of Egypt, if he were to see any attractive woman, he would, if she was single, khalas, that was his day. If she wasn't single, he would kill her husband, and you know the rest. Ibrahim was afraid for his life, so to speak, according to this hadith. So he said, once we enter Egypt, if the Pharaoh sees you, you're going to tell him that this guy's my brother. He's not my husband. And so she did. Pharaoh sets eye on Sarah, the wife of Ibrahim. When he asked her, who's this gentleman walking besides you? She said, this is my brother. He said, well, okay. Well, if he's your brother, we don't have a problem. And for a couple of weeks, they were in Egypt. You can imagine what was happening. This is in Sahih al-Bukhari. This has been mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari, narrated as an Israelite narration. Something so offensive to a prophet of Allah, let alone Ibrahim al-Khalil. This was also one of the reasons why some schools of thought spread. Another reason, another factor, was cultural mixing. Muslims started to mix with Persians, with Romans. When I say Persians, I mean the Persian Empire, who were not Muslim at the time. They started mixing with the Roman Empire. They started trading. Muslims began translating books from Latin into Arabic, from Persian into Arabic, from Roman into Arabic. Well, this cultural mixing, it allowed Muslims to take from these cultures. They took things from the Persian Empire, from the Roman Empire, from the Indian Empire, and so on and so forth. This cultural mixing, it had benefits, it had its pros, and it had its cons. The sixth factor, of course there's a lot of factors, but the ones that I'd like to mention tonight. The sixth factor was basically giving personal opinion. One of the reasons that we have so many theological schools of thought is that some people, they felt as if they had reached a degree in which they can speak freely. They've reached a stage of ijtihad, that they have enough knowledge to say whatever they want. And this is very dangerous, my dear friends. This is very dangerous. To think that you've reached a stage in which you can give out your own laws, pass out your own laws. This is very sacred. In one hadith by Imam al-Sadiq, he says, فِرَّ مِنَ الْفُتْيَا فِرَارَكَ مِنَ الْأَسَدِ. He tells certain scholars that run away from issuing a fatwa the same way you run away from a lion. If you see a lion, you know you're going to run. You're going to become Speedy Gonzalez. You're going to be running. He says, don't issue a fatwa that quickly. Run. Don't be quick in issuing a fatwa. Anyhow, this is another subject. I don't want to open this chapter. Let's close this chapter for now. Maybe later on we'll open it. There were some in Islamic history, they felt that they had reached ijtihad. They can say whatever they want. We saw a couple of nights ago how one of the Sahaba, he said that there were two things allowed during the days of Rasulullah, yet I make them haram. Ajib. Who are you? Two things that were legislated by the Quran and by Rasulullah. You have the audacity and boldness to say that Rasulullah had made them halal and I make them haram? Who are you? This is what happened. And of course, if he's going to talk freely, you're going to have a whole new school of thought. These, according to my understanding and according to my research, these are basically some of the factors that led to the rise of certain theological schools of thought. وصلى على محمد وعلى محمد. Now, within the next 10-15 minutes that we have, I'd like to introduce you to some of these schools of thought. These are schools of thought that either existed and they don't exist today, or they still exist today. I'll give you a very brief overview of some of these schools of thought, and some schools of thought within Shia Islam as well. Because we Shias, we're not innocent of these divisions as well. We the Shia, we are split into many groups. We today are the Imamis, Ithna Ashari, the 12 Shias. But there are many other kinds of Shia. Maybe tonight I'll get to address some of these schools of thought just for general knowledge, general information. And for those of you that are interested, you could go and do your own research and get to know more about these various schools of thought. Among these schools of thought is a school of thought called Al-Mu'tazila, the Mu'tazili school of thought. This was a Sunni school of thought. The founder of the school of thought, his name is Wasil ibn Ata. Wasil ibn Ata, I'm going to give you a bunch of names. You don't have to memorize all these names. Don't worry, they're not going to be on the question of the day tomorrow. But just try to bear with me. Wasil ibn Ata was a student of a man called Hassan al-Basri. Hassan al-Basri never saw Rasulullah. He was not among the Sahaba. He was among the Tabi'een. The Sahaba are those who saw Rasulullah. The tabi'een are those that did not see the Rasulullah, but they were the second generation of Muslims. Al-Hasan al-Basri was from that second generation of Muslims who saw himself as a scholar. He saw himself to be a top scholar in the presence of Imam Ali alayhi salam. In the presence of Imam Ali. And in fact, when Imam Ali became the Khalifa, he did not even give him allegiance. Hasan al-Basri did not give allegiance to Imam Ali. And one day, when Imam Ali fought the battle of Nahrawan against the Khawarij, Hasan al-Basri was telling people not to join Imam Ali's army. He was telling people not to join Imam Ali's army. One day, Imam Ali saw him. He told him, Ya Hasan, why didn't you join my army and come and defend me? He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, I wanted to. I left my house to come and join your army and fight against the Khawarij and to defend you, but I heard a voice from behind me telling me, don't go, O Hasan, because whoever dies and whoever lives in this battle, they're all in hell. Everyone goes to hell. Whoever participates in this battle, all goes to hell. Imam Ali told him, Ya Hasan, do you know who that was? Do you know whose voice that was? Hasan said, no. He said, that was your brother, Iblis. That was your brother, Shaitan. Anyhow, Hasan al-Basri saw himself to be a scholar. One day, he's sitting in his class, lecturing, and remember his student, Wasil ibn Ata, the founder of the Mu'tazili school of thought, is also there. Someone came and asked Al-Hasan al-Basri. He told him, Ya Hasan, what do you say about a Muslim who commits a big sin? Is he a Muslim or is he a kafir? Because there were some Muslims, mainly the Khawarij, they saw that if a Muslim commits a big sin, like, for example, murder, fornication, adultery, drinking alcohol, these are big sins. He is no longer a Muslim, according to the Khawarij. So they wanted to see what Hasan al-Basri would state. Hasan al-Basri remained quiet. He didn't say anything. His student, Wasil ibn Ata, spoke out. He said, I don't think that a person who commits a big sin is a Muslim, nor a kafir. Thank you very much. He's no longer, he's not a Muslim, he's neither a Muslim nor a kafir. He's somewhere in between. And he called it manzila bain manzilatayn. Hasan al-Basri was offended that his student in his presence was speaking. He wasn't even asked. He was receiving the question. He told him, Ya Wasil, go leave us. Wasil ibn Ata took another corner inside the masjid and he began to explain this theory. I'tazala. I'tazala means he excluded himself. That's why al-Mu'tazila, they're called Mu'tazila, because he excluded. Mu'tazila literally means the exclusivists. Anyhow, they have their certain beliefs, they have their certain ideology, but this is basically their history. And this school of thought died out. The Mu'tazila school of thought died out. Today, there is no one who practices the Mu'tazili school of thought. Another well-known school of thought in Sunni Islam is called the Ash'ari school of thought. The Asha'ira. The Asha'ira, their founder is Al-Shaykh Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, who was a Mu'tazili himself, a follower of Wasil ibn Ata. But later on he switched and he founded his own school of thought called the Ash'ari school of thought. Thank you. Now his beliefs are very interesting. Among his beliefs, this school of thought, the Ash'ari school of thought, that became the predominant Sunni school of thought, the predominant Sunni theological school of thought. Among their beliefs is predestination. That whatever we do, Allah is really doing it. We're not doing it. So when you came today, you didn't come by choice. Allah made you come here. When you pray, Allah makes you pray. And when you drink alcohol, Allah is making you drink alcohol. Al-Asha'ira completely deny human free will. They say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us and He created everything that we do. When you ask them, what is your proof? They say the Quran. The Quran says, وَاللَّهُ خَلَقَكُمْ وَمَا تَعْمَلُونَ. As-Saffat, verse 96. That Allah created you and He created your actions as well. Of course, they completely misunderstood the verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us and He has created our actions, but it doesn't mean that He forces us. When you came here today, it doesn't mean that He forced you. We know this through intuition. Everyone knows that we do have free will. We feel it. We feel that we have the decision. We can make decisions. As for Allah created us and created our actions, it doesn't mean that He forces us to do certain things. That means Allah created us and created various actions, and He gave us the choice. And then why do we take only this verse and neglect the other verses? The Quran also says, إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا. We showed him the two paths. He could either be grateful or ingrateful. Thus, this idea of predestination, it came from the Ash'ari. And by the way, it was politically inspired as well. It was politically inspired. Because when this school of thought came out, Bani Umayyah were in power. People were questioning Yazid, why did he kill Imam Hussein? For years after, people were shocked. How could a person who called himself Amir al-Mu'mineen and the Khalifa of Muslims kill the grandson of Rasulullah? So they said, you know what, let's just give a theological answer. Let's say that it's predestination. Yazid didn't have any choice. Allah was the one who forced Yazid to kill Imam Hussein. Khalas. When he throw it on God, why do you close the door? Who's going to come and question God? Is anyone going to come and question the wisdom and the justice of Allah? Of course not. This gave a justification for the Khulafa to do whatever they want. To steal, to kill, turmoil, oppression, tyranny, suppress, all in the name of predestination. All in the name of Allah is behind all of this. This is one of the beliefs of the Ash'ari. Another thing that they believe in, Ash'ari, they believe that there is absolutely no room for logic in Islam. Islam is a bunch of dogma. There is absolutely no room for logic, especially not in Islamic laws. When it comes to Islamic laws, you have to stick to the book. There's no room for logic. There's no room for using your brain. And there's a conflict between we, the followers of Ahl Bayt, and the Ash'ari. The conflict is as follows. Think about it. The conflict is as follows. Lying is bad. Everyone agrees. Whether you're Muslim or not Muslim, whether you're Sunni or Shiite, lying is bad. But this is the question. Lying is bad because Allah said it's bad? Or Allah said lying is haram because it's bad? Is everyone following me? Why is lying bad? Because innately it's bad because our mind and logic says it's bad, or because Allah says don't lie? The Ash'ari say no, lying is not bad. It only became bad because Allah said it's bad. If Allah hadn't said it's bad, it's not bad. Killing is not bad. But because Allah stated that it's bad and He said don't do it, it became bad. You tell him, are you serious? He said yes. Because if you say, my logic says lying is bad and hence Allah has to make lying haram, that means we are restricting Allah. We are telling Allah that you must follow our logic. And since Allah cannot be restricted to our own logic, we tell Allah, you could do whatever you want. And whatever you tell us, that is good. And whatever you tell us not to do, that is bad. But before you tell us, nothing is good and bad. You see where they're coming from? You see the fallacy in their way of thinking? And then they continue, they say, whatever God does is justice. If God decided to punish little children and put them in hellfire, that is justice. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is justice. Who are we to question Allah's will? When we debate them, we tell them, listen, this is a matter of who came first, the chicken or the egg? Lying is bad because Allah said it's bad, or because it was bad and Allah made it bad. Allah made it haram. We, the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt, we say no. There is room for logic in Islamic laws. There is room for rationale and reason and logic in Islamic law. And we would not be restricting Allah. For example, killing is bad. Everyone's logic can think of that. Killing is bad. When we say Allah makes it haram, we're not restricting Him. We are saying that Allah follows our logic, not that He follows. Our logic discovers Allah's laws. Allah is not restricted to our logic. I know this is a bit confusing. I'm getting really weird looks. But this is the gist of it. Now you discover what we have to do in Hawza and why we look tired all day long. Among the things that the Ash'ari say is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if He wanted to, He can order us to do something that we're not even capable of. And if we couldn't do it, He could punish us. For example, Allah can tell us to fast for a week consecutively without breaking our fast, not even water. He could. If He wanted to, He could. And if we were to disobey Him, He has the right to punish us for it. This is among their ideology. While we, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, we say this is nonsense. Allah would never do such a thing because this is injustice. One of the main qualities and traits of Allah is that He's just. Allah is just. The Ash'ari, they say, no, Allah is not just. Allah doesn't even need to be just. We can't restrict Allah and tell Him, you have to be fair. Who are we to tell Him we have to be fair? Our answer is that we don't restrict Allah. Allah Himself has restricted Himself to justice. Allah Himself says, كَتَبَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. Allah Himself restricts Himself to justice and mercy. And so on and so forth. These are the two main schools of thought, the two main Sunni theological schools of thought. I wanted to discuss others. Of course, there's Ahl al-Hadith wal-Hashawiyya, Al-Maturidiyya, Al-Qadariyya, Al-Khawarij, Al-Juhamiyya, Al-Mujassama, Al-Karramiyya, Al-Zahiriyya, and the list goes on. There's tens of schools of thought within Sunni Islam. In Shia Islam, there's also tens of schools of thought. There's the Waqifah, Al-Fatahiyya, Al-Kisaniyya, Al-Shaykhiyya, Al-Ismailiyya, Al-Zaydiyya. I wanted to talk about Al-Zaydiyya and Ismailiyya, but it doesn't look like I have enough time for tonight. Inshallah, perhaps in the coming nights. I wanted to give everyone a brief overview of the history of Islamic theological schools of thought. Why do we have the various schools of thought? And perhaps this will open the door for some to go out, do their research, compare and contrast, and choose the best school of thought. The Quran says, فَبَشِّرْ عِبَادٍ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. Give glad tidings to my servants who listen to various opinions, to listen to various schools of thought, and then they choose the best, the one that makes the most sense, the one that's most logical, the one that conforms most to the Quran and to the authentic Sunnah of Rasulullah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin.